can hold 1.4 billion people together for another 24 hours. That's his top priority. And he spends most of his time fighting internal corruption, which is overwhelming. By the way, that's an ageless problem in China. You know, when the Japanese invaded the place, they bought off half the Chinese and marched ashore. People don't realize that. All the bankers in Shanghai cut a deal with the Imperial Japanese Army. So the Imperial Japanese Army marched in, killed large numbers of Chinese, but they didn't touch the banks. We don't understand the reality. So I think we have to face the fact that most of the problems that we have are generated here at home by us. We create them. And the budget's a perfect example of it. You know, we've reached a point where nobody on the Hill wants to cut a dime out of anything for fear they won't get reelected. That's not a good sign. It means that people pay attention to one thing and only one thing: the check in the mail, the freebie they get, the food stamp or something else. We've lost sight of everything else. And then you have the small group of people in Washington that enjoy these regime change wars. And effectively, the war with Iran is another regime change war waged by Israel and us. The possibility of war with Venezuela, which looks very, very real right now, unfortunately, is another regime change war. And if you go back and listen to Joe Biden and the people that surrounded him and the neocons that were advocates since, I would say easily since 2014, when we installed this puppet regime in Kiev to wage war on Russia, they've all been about regime change, at least on the surface. Obviously, they wanted to get into Russia, divide it up, strip it of its resources. The bankers were anxious to see that work so they could all get rich. We have a similar situation potentially in Venezuela. You know, Venezuela has great oil and gas, emerald mines, gold mines. Gosh, of course, it's a big problem. You see, it's almost the size of Germany and France together. It has 1,700 miles of coastline. It has 1,380 miles of border with Colombia and roughly 1,380 miles of border with Brazil. Oh, that should be easy. You know? Yeah, let's go change the regime. What are you going to do it with 2,000 Marines? Some special ops? And of course, the old problem with all of these things, it's the problem in the Middle East, it's the problem with Russia. What do you do when it doesn't work? Well, historically, what have we done? Escalate. Until we can't, because the American people finally wake up and say that we've had enough. Get out. And that's what happened in Vietnam. Nobody talks about Vietnam anymore.
Yeah,
you don't talk about defeats, do you? Or do we talk much about Iraq? I don't think so. They threw us out in 2011. And the few that stayed on, they want to get rid of them. And I think most of us have pulled out as a result. Where's the big success story in Afghanistan? How many times do you have to have strategic failure before someone inside the United States notices? And that's the biggest problem, that the American people have been insulated from all these disasters. As long as, you know, they can go out and get a case of beer, you know, drive home, watch the game Monday night. Hey, it's not my problem. And we have no draft, so no one feels the pain except the less than 1% that are in the armed forces. And, you know, they're expendable. What are we worried about them for? It's a pretty terrible situation. I don't think it can go on much longer. And, you know, I think what may rescue us, this is a terrible thing to say, but it may be bankruptcy that rescues us from ourselves. But you know, we have to admit to the blame, don't we? We're Americans. We voted for this stuff. We shut up. We said nothing. We said, fine, go ahead. And we're in a mess.
All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Kalshi. Kalshi is a prediction market.
Macgregor, you have served inside the Pentagon and advised the highest levels of US military. When you say Washington is eyeing Venezuela, what kind of intervention are we talking about here? Are we looking at sanctions, covert operations, or something more direct? That's chilling assessment. The idea that another regime change operations might already be in motion raises serious questions about who benefits and whether the American people are being told the truth.
where you can bet on just about anything, or you can go there and just see what people are betting on. Like, for example, there were bets raging about whether the government would or wouldn't shut down all last week. There's bets about whether Mamdani is going to win the mayoral race or not. He's the heavy favorite at this point. You could also bet on sports and all types of basically anything you can think of. Check them out. Kalshi.com. Join the over 5 million users. You can trade on politics, culture, even the weather. That's Kalshi.com. All right, let's get back into the show. Yeah. No, that's that. There is something to that. We have to take some responsibility for it. And of course, this is what Ron Paul used to always say, is that this system is fundamentally unsustainable. And so it will not sustain itself. And that end is going to come one way or the other. And then I think the question is, what do we do with that? And what is the response to that? You know, as you said, as you were talking about this, I'm thinking, I had mentioned this on my last show, but so recently on Piers Morgan, he had a panel where there was one of our mutual good friends, Scott Horton, was on, and your old colleague, General Wesley Clark, was on the show too. And there was one point where it was the end of the show. So like Wesley Clark made this point, and then Scott didn't get around to respond to it. But I found it like truly striking. At one point, Scott was condemning Donald Trump's support for Israel's destruction of Gaza. And then General Wesley Clark said once at the end, he said, yeah, but what's the alternative? What does Israel pull out now and let Hamas say that they won? And I was really taken back by that I went, so you, like, at this point, that Mr. former 4-star general, you still have not learned the lesson of, like, yes, that is, I mean, okay, technically that is true. And I guess that is one of the bad parts of fighting an occupation war where there's an insurgency and eventually you can't beat the insurgency. Yeah, all they have to do is not lose, and then they get to say that they won. But that applies to Afghanistan. That applied to Vietnam. That applies to, yes, if like, so, but essentially the thing that's...
Colonel, you have been openly critical of the US foreign policy establishment. Do you see a pattern here where Washington repeatedly intervenes under the banners of freedom and democracy, only to leave the chaos behind? Exactly from Iraq to Libya, the results speak for themselves. Billions spent, thousands of lives lost, and no real stability achieved. Please explain about it.
So frustrating about it is that obviously, if you just think about this, what the situation, the corner that you're painting yourself into now is saying, what, you can't leave until what? There's not one young man with a rifle who wishes to avenge his cousin or father or son or like, until none of that. So until under current conditions, Gaza becomes Denmark, that's when this can end. Like, it's just, you've set an it's an obvious recipe for forever war. And it's shocking to me that somebody who, you know, like, look, I don't agree with Wesley Clark on a lot of things. He's a Democrat, and I don't agree with his politics. But you would think that here's a guy who was like the leader of the NATO forces, a 4-star general, a guy who's got to have, you know, like a head on his shoulders. And it was just stunning to me to hear that you're still working within this paradigm that means we bleed ourselves into bankruptcy and your boys get slaughtered, like the ones you're supposed to be responsible for. It's just, I guess the question is more like, how are more people in the military not able to see the things that you're able to see, I guess, is the question.
I think a lot of the trouble starts at West Point because you go to a mixer. In the old days, we were all male, and they would bus in these girls from all over the place. And somebody would walk in and say, well, you know, I'm not really very impressed and everything else. Somebody said, here's a beer, put your beer goggles on. And after enough beers, suddenly everything looks really good. I think I think Wes Clark, by the way, I know him and I like him personally very much. He's a very intelligent man. He and I always got along well, though we did not agree on a lot of things. But to his credit, he tolerated me when I disagreed with him. I think because he knew I would always be honest with him and I would be loyal to him, and I have been and I will be. But he was wounded, almost died in Vietnam. They had to fly him on an emergency basis all the way to Japan. And they thought they were going to lose him on the table. His wife flew into Japan, and it was almost nothing short of a miracle that he survived. And so you would think, in retrospect, as you reflect on that you would question exactly what you brought up. But it's deeply ingrained in him, this idea, well, you have to win. We haven't won anything for a very...
And the global south pushing back. Do you think Washington's era of dominance is ending? Is this push into Venezuela a sign of desperation or an attempt to cling to the last remnants of empire? That's powerful point. Perhaps this is not about the protecting democracy. It all but is preserving the influence.
very long time. And we forget how terrible the Second World War was. I listen to people like, well, we won the Second World War. Well, actually, 50 plus million people died in it. We happened to be on the winning side, but we were all really, really happy we came in late, and we were really, really happy when we only fought for about 3 years and it was over. And we don't want to go back there and experience it again. But that's not what you hear. I'm so glad the president was tough and told those Russians to get with the program. What? Have you lost your mind? This is a sovereign state. It has its own national security interests. They're legitimate security interests. What's wrong with treating them as legitimate security interests? They don't have any interest to compare to ours. Well, what are our interests in Ukraine? Explain this to me, please. I haven't figured it out. And oh, by the way, what driving strategic interest compels us to support the Israeli extermination of people in Gaza? I don't get it. Now, you may not like the people in Gaza. That's fine. And the Israelis, it's their country, obviously, if they want to do these things. But what are we doing supporting it? Is that consistent with our values? I hear all this crap all the time about, well, our values dictate. Okay, what are those? Mass murder and expulsion? Where's that on the list? I don't see it. I wouldn't want to do that inside my own country. So, what are we doing it over?
I have some questions about Venezuela and the new South America. First question is, what makes Venezuela strategically important for Washington right now? Is this about oil geography or controlling influence in the South America? How do you assess Nicolas Maduro positions today? Is he secure or vulnerable to outside pressure? Some reports say US intelligence and the special forces have already been active near the border. Do you have insight into that? If Washington moves forward with the regime change, what would be the regional reactions from Brazil, Mexico, or Colombia? Would this push Latin America closer to BRICS and China instead of the US?
Overseas for? It's all very, very odd stuff. And the biggest problem, though, I think it's not just the Americans who on any given day, Dave, you and I both know, the average American doesn't care what happens overseas. As long as he has a case of beer, he can watch the game, he's happy. As long as he has a car he can drive and can afford the gas, he's happy. As long as he has, wife and kids to play with, he's happy. I mean, this is kind of where we are. We're not an overly demanding people, and we are rather simplistic. We're not complex people in that sense. But the problem with this very inward focus is that we allow things to happen in our name beyond our borders that are catastrophic. Dave Petraeus, I talked to him back in 2005 when he was at Leavenworth. That's the last time he and I spoke. He was a couple of years ahead of me at the military academy, and I had come to the staff college to speak. And we talked. He talked about Iraq. What do you think and everything else? And I said, well, these raids, checkpoints, and patrols. I said, this is just a steady grind. It's not going to take us anywhere. The British gave this up in Ulster. It didn't work. We don't want to do this. And he said, well, I agree with you, but we need to do these and these and these things. And finally I said, well, why don't we just leave? And he said, we can't do that. Anbar province will become a platform for the projection of terrorism all over the world. I said, well, in Vietnam, we just left. We just pulled out. And it made no difference to us at all. But 58,000 men died. Another 100,000+ were wounded. And what, 2-3 million Vietnamese were butchered as a result? So this is insane. It's this mentality that, we can't do this. We have to have a surrender ceremony on the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay to end every conflict, or we're unhappy. But that's not realistic, and that's not necessarily why you fight a war. You don't fight wars to exterminate people. I mean, maybe Stalin did and Hitler did, but we don't do that. So it's very frustrating, and I run into this all the time with many people that I served in the military with. And then you have the problem of people that were in Iraq or Afghanistan for long periods of time in the last 20, 30 years. And of course, they're not very fond of anybody they think is a Muslim. Okay, well, there was a time when we felt that way about anybody who came from Northeast Asia, especially after the Second World War with Japan. But you don't allow that kind of thing to shape your policy and your thinking. And I think politicians play to audiences too much.
Yeah, for sure.
What was it that H.L. Mencken said? If a politician found out he had cannibals in his district, he'd provide them with missionaries for dinner. It's not far off.
Hey guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Crowd Health, longtime sponsor of this show. They've really created a true alternative to the broken health insurance model. And now they have the Black Swan membership. This is the healthcare alternative for those who want autonomy over their care, their costs, and their lifestyle. And for just $95 a month, you get a team of expert bill negotiators, access to low-cost prescriptions and lab testing, plus a curated database of high-quality, low-cost doctors who have been vetted by Crowd Health. No insurance middleman, no network dictating your care, just you in the driver's seat. And if a major Black Swan event hits, you cover the first 15,000 and the crowd steps up to help fund the rest. It's like the freedom we used to have before Obamacare turned healthcare into a bureaucratic nightmare. And if you're ready to end 2025 on your terms, use the promo code POTP when you go to joincrowdhealth.com, and you'll get the first 3 months for just $80. That's right. Kick the fall season off with healthcare that puts you first. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out, take your power back. This is how we win. Visit joincrowdhealth.com and use the promo code POTP today. All right, let's get back into the show. No, it's certainly not. And I think that there's, I guess, even for someone like me who I think a lot about these things and I enjoy reading, this is kind of my world. I have been really shocked by the recklessness and irresponsibility of the leadership within the military and the political class. Like even for a group of people, I understand there's going to be some corruption, there's going to be mistakes made and things like that. I mean, but look, even in the George W. Bush administration, John Mearsheimer covers this in his book. It's a very interesting little detail in American history. But immediately after 9/11, it was Colin Powell, probably the wisest member of the Bush administration, although he still fell in line and sold the war that he knew was based off lies. But that's between him and his maker at this point. So Colin Powell went to George W. Bush and was like, you got to push for a two-state solution. I mean, that's the, if we got to go right to the core of this. This is why we deal with this terrorism problem. You got to, and then ultimately it was Tom DeLay and other forces who were like, oh no, you can't go against the lobby like that. You'll be a one-term president. And so he backed off of it. But just the point being that like there was an understanding by some wise people at the top of the military that like, look, this is why we deal with this terrorism problem. And there seems to be almost no thought of what, for even if you could remove any feeling of humanity for the poor Palestinians and what they are going through, the national security risk that this imposes on the American people to be, it's not as if like the world isn't so stupid to not know that this is America's genocide, not Israel's. Like, I mean, yes, it's Israel doing it, but they could never get away with this if it wasn't for the full support of the US government. Again, like Tucker Carlson, our friend last night, was breaking down. Israel, like going back to basics here, Israel is a teeny little country in the Middle East. It's like they always like to say they're the size of New Jersey. They don't often mention they don't have the GDP of New Jersey. Okay, this is
so please explain about it. You have mentioned the intervention playbook. What similarities do you have between the Venezuela today and the Iraq or Libya in the past? In your view, do U.S. military leaders truly believe these interventions are winnable, or are they simply following orders from the political interest? Looking back, which intervention do you think did the most damage to the American reputation abroad? If the US were pull back its global footprint, do you believe instability would increase or decrease? Please explain this issues.
This is not, they are in no position to get away with any of what they're doing, including maintaining the occupation. They're in no position. Netanyahu goes around and talks a big game about what Israel can do. This is your baby brother talking about how he can win every bar fight, knowing that you're behind him, ready to crack skulls if anyone messes with him. But the fact that there seems to be either there's no feeling for this, or everybody is so controlled one way or another that they just can't act on it. But if just maintaining the occupation was this big security risk because it engendered all this hatred in the Muslim world against us, well, what is this? What have we seen over the last 2 years? And like the blowback doesn't always come within 18 months or something like that. Like we are opening ourselves up for a whole nother generation of young Muslim men to be radicalized toward hating us, even worse than we've already been dealing with. And there seems to be almost no thought of like, oh, that ought to be the concern of the American government, the national security of our country.
Well, unlike New Jersey,
that was called Douglas Macgregor, a man who has been inside the system and now wants us about what's coming next. Whether Washington listens or not, the consequences of another regime change could shape America's future for decades. I'm DEEPAK, and this is for USN TV. Stay informed, stay independent, and thank you.
Israel also does not have any good pizza, movies. These guys haven't grown up in Philadelphia. I mean, that's very disappointing. Having been to Israel several times, that's something they lack. On the other hand, I think, we have to understand something. People like me, I grew up as a Quaker. My mother's family being in the country since 1681. In Philadelphia, I went to one of the oldest Quaker private school in the country. We were all male. Once again, this is before, mixed everything. And Israel was treated as this triumph of the Second World War, that in view of what had happened, and remember, the Jews collectively at one point or another have been thrown out of almost every country in Europe and the Middle East over 2,000 years. Now, we don't want to go down that road and ask that, why is that? But that was taught to us. We heard that. And, they were murdered and butchered during the Second World War. We now have a state for them. So for most of us, everything began in 1947-48 without any understanding of what had happened in the previous 80 to 100 years and how this sort of Israeli state crept into the mix thanks to the Rothschild banking cartel and people like Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, has always been one of my heroes. So we saw Israel as this very virtuous place that had lots of smart people that could do interesting things and were a blessing to humanity. And, I've been to Israel several times, and all of my dealings were always with the IDF, people who were either in the military or had been, and I liked them enormously, got along with them. There was always this undercurrent, especially in Gaza. I visited Gaza, the Israeli headquarters down there, in 2020 in February. And I saw everything that they did. And the Israelis had that place locked down so tight you can't even begin to imagine. I mean, the quality of their intelligence that they did. I mean, if somebody on the other side shot at someone, an Israeli soldier in a tower or something on the outskirts of Gaza, they would know within, I would say, 90 seconds who it was. They had everybody's picture, everybody's cell phone number. They knew where everybody lived. They had all the tunnels mapped. I mean, this is a brilliant operation. And I remember asking a couple of officers that were there that were escorting me. I said, well, what are you going to do about this long term? I mean, there's nothing can be done with these people? I mean, surely they have this nice, as Trump said, nice property sits on the Mediterranean. Is there something? Oh, no, it's hopeless. Have you tried to? Oh, no, yeah, it's hopeless. Can't do anything. So I didn't say anything more. But when the attack happened on 7 October, one of the things I began thinking about immediately is how did this happen?
That was Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a man who has been inside the system and now wants us about what is coming next.
Now, when I say
whether Washington listens or not, the consequences of another regime change could shape America's future for decades. I am DEEPAK, and this is for USN TV. Stay informed, stay independent, and thank you.